What a fun episode we have lined up for you with episode 4 of Locked On Royals as Kansas City just walked off Cleveland this afternoon. We got some fun things to get into. Freddy Fermin and what he means to this lineup going forward. John Sherman had his presser this morning. We'll dive into those comments. And the news of this afternoon is Alec Marsh. Jordan Lyles is sick. He's not going to make his start tomorrow night against the Dodgers. So will be the number 14 prospect in the Royal system getting the nod a Friday night at Kauffman Stadium. All of that coming up on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're all feeling pretty good to this afternoon after Kansas City just walked off the Cleveland Guardians, the first place Cleveland Guardians, I might add, in a 3-game set. They get it done 4-3 over Cleveland, and really a whirlwind of events that happened in that 10th inning. But before we dive into it, want to make you, our listener, really important for this first part, because thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Network, your team every day. So as we just mentioned, Kansas City walks off the Cleveland Guardians at the K this afternoon. And for the first 7 innings of this one, I did not feel like at all that the Royals are going to find a way to squeak one out or really make this game competitive. As crazy as it sounds, trailing Shane Bieber and Cleveland by 2 runs going to the 8th inning felt insurmountable. I really didn't have the expectation that the Royals were going to get something going, not off the Cleveland bullpen. But in that bottom of the 8th inning, they get it done with Drew Waters, they get it done with Edward Olivares, and they get it done with Nick Pratto, who had really been struggling in the month of June. But they do tie it up with an RBI single from Nick Pratto. Edward Olivares missed a 3-run home run, a pinch hit 3-run home run by just a matter of feet. But nonetheless, Kansas City had tied it up after trailing 2-0 for the last 3 to 4 innings, had been completely shut down by Shane Bieber. Zach Greinke had a quality start, but the Royals found some success off of Cleveland's bullpen. So there it is, 2-2. Nobody scores in the top of the ninth, the bottom of the ninth, setting up a very dramatic 10th inning. You have Aroldis Chapman on the bump for Kansas City. He looked unhittable today. And credit where credit is due. If Freddy Fermin did not walk it off for the Royals, we'd all be talking about what Jose Ramirez did in the top of the 10th inning. So there he is at third base, 2 strikes to Andres Jimenez at the plate. And we all know how slow to the plate Aroldis Chapman is. In fact, Aroldis Chapman just treated Jose Ramirez like he wasn't there. There was no way in hell that he was going to try to run down the line and score by stealing home. But nobody was covering third base. Jose Ramirez is inching closer to home, and Aroldis Chapman just never pays attention to him. Now, of course, when you're Aroldis Chapman, you're throwing triple digits. The ball's going to get to Salvador Perez quicker than most. But Jose Ramirez with the heads-up play, he didn't really have faith that Andres Jimenez was going to be able to get a hit off of Aroldis Chapman. So he puts matters into his own hands and has an acrobatic slide at the plate, avoids Salvi's tag. He's originally called out, but then after review, Jose Ramirez is labeled safe. So Cleveland takes a 3-2 lead going into the bottom of the 10th inning, and here we all are once again. You lost the first 2 games to Cleveland. You get thumped the night before. It's 140 degrees at Kauffman Stadium, and you kind of feel like, well, this is just how it's going to go, right? You're 22-58. Of course you would lose on somebody stealing home on you. Just oblivious. And I might add this, completely inexcusable from the Royals. That cannot happen in that moment. I know you don't want Chapman to balk or make a step-off throw and wildly throw it into the stands or something like that, but somebody's got to be yelling, step off, looking back to third. But Jose Ramirez had really already committed. But that was a mental lapse, if you will. Inexcusable. And there's been too many Little League moments for a team that has the second worst record in American League Baseball. But that's inexcusable. That cannot happen in that moment. But fortunately, as we're going to get to here, we don't have to worry about it too much because the Royals found a way to walk it off and avoid a sweep at the hands of the Cleveland Guardians. So in that bottom of the 10th inning, you have the ghost runner rule, which I'm just not a fan of. Of course, it almost cost Kansas City the top of the 10th, but it helped them in the bottom half. But Kyle Isbell's out there at second. Nicky Lopez, who was hit on the hand the night before, he's back in there. Miscommunication on Cleveland's side, and he beats out the slow roll at first base. So first and third, still facing Emmanuel Clase, who's got that triple-digit cutter. And Drew Waters strikes out, but it brings up the guy we're going to talk about here in the first segment, Freddy Fermin. Now, Freddy Fermin is not an all-star. Freddy Fermin is not somebody that is going to dominate at the plate for decades in Kansas City. But he's a fantastic story, and he's fun, and the Royals are fun when Freddy Fermin's in the lineup. And I might add, the kid has been scorching at the plate over the last 7 games. Here's the gaudy numbers that Freddy Fermin has. He is slashing .643, .667 with a slug of 1.017. Those are Freddy Fermin's numbers after this walk-off hit today. But what I was so impressed with, as he's standing in there against Clase, all the pressures in the world on him. And keep this in mind, too. You're sitting on the bench. It's hot out. From time to time, you're going out there and warming up a pitcher, but Freddy Fermin's cold off the bench. Not body temperature-wise, he hasn't gone through 9 innings, 10 innings of the game. So Matt Quatrero says, grab a bat, Freddy. Try to get a hit off Emmanuel Clase. And takes a couple of close pitches. And let's just give the listeners here what's in Emmanuel Clase's arsenal. A 100 to 102 cutter and a slider at 92, 93. You tell me, even with 100 practice swings, how many you could actually make contact on. So Freddy Fermin steps into the box. Count goes to 2-2. He's fouling off tough pitches. He's off balance. But he never really loses his focus on what he's wanting to do. And all Freddy Fermin's trying to do is get the ball in the air, drive that run in from third, tie it up, take your chances in the 11th. But Emmanuel Clase leaves a 91-mile-an-hour slider just out over the plate. Fermin lunges and knocks it over Jose Ramirez's head at third base, goes down into the corner, and both runs score, resulting in a walk-off win for the Kansas City Royals. I know he's got less than 80 at-bats, and he's a 28-year-old backup catcher, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say this needs to be the starting catcher for the Royals after the All-Star break. Now, before you come pounding at my door with the pitchforks, this does not mean Salvador Perez is out of the lineup. I am not advocating for benching Salvador Perez. But Salvador Perez has really been struggling at the plate of late. He's been banged up. He had a procedure on his eye to improve his vision. There's a lot of things going on with Salvador Perez. And on a team that has this record through 81 games, 23-58, the best thing you want to do for Salvador Perez is get his offense back. How do you do that? You take him off his feet, you give him some rest, and DH him. The beauty of it right now for the Royals is they don't have to take any at-bats away from the DH position. Vinny Pasquantino's out for the year. So you can play Nick Pratto at first base, you DH Salvador Perez, and then you put Freddy Fermin behind the plate. And I might add, advanced metrics-wise, Freddy Fermin is a better defensive catcher than Salvador Perez. So it makes all sense in the world to give him this opportunity in the second half. Freddy Fermin is not the future catcher in Kansas City. He's not going to be there for 5 years, but I'd like to see what you have in him. If he's a future backup, well, let's see if he can handle a starting role. You're not going to put MJ Melendez behind the plate anymore. He's clearly going to be an outfielder moving from this point on. So to me, Freddy Fermin's the answer. His WRC plus at 132. One of my good friends on Twitter, Royals Farm Report, a great tweet they had after Freddy Fermin had that walk-off hit. 132 WRC plus, and he's third on the team in F-WAR. And another one of my Twitter friends, Josh Kaiser, who does some great work over at One Royal Way, their Royals podcast, he's brought up that Freddy Fermin's a dude, man. Freddy Fermin can be in an everyday lineup, and it's about time we see this. And that was impressive as hell today. and the Royals get it done again with Freddy Fermin walking off somebody at home. Cool to see. I mean, a guy that was signed at 20 years old out of Venezuela, spent 8 years in the minor leagues, including the COVID year, and here he is being able to succeed as a 28-year-old rookie. Basically a 28-year-old rookie. Just cool as hell for a guy like Freddy Fermin as he walks it off for the Kansas City Royals today against the Cleveland Guardians. They avoid the sweep, so they grab that series finale before they welcome the Los Angeles Dodgers tomorrow night for a 3-game set to wrap up the final homestand before the All-Star break. When we come back, don't click anywhere. Keep it right here, locked on to Locked On Royals. John Sherman spoke to the media. He said some things maybe some of you agree with, and he said some things that pissed off some fans. Well, we're going to dive into that next, right here on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Network as we continue our deep dive into this Royals team after a walk-off win against the Cleveland Guardians. But before we go any further, want to give a shout out to today's sponsor. That would be Game Time. And if you're ever looking to buy tickets, Game Time is where you need to go to. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. Get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The Game Time guarantee means you always get the best price. If you find the tickets in the same section row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Now, download the Game Time app today. Right as you're listening, download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Again, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. So, Game Time is where you need to go to buy your tickets. Don't worry about planning months in advance. When you're in a hassle, you're in a struggle, this is the place to go to get all your tickets for baseball games. Of course, if you're in Kansas City, you want to go see Alec Marsh make his debut tomorrow, use the Game Time app and be sure to use that code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on that purchase. Now, looking at what John Sherman said today, he spoke to the Kansas City media, and I can't really say that I was stunned by what he said. I wasn't caught off guard by anything John Sherman said. At the end of the day, this was a mid-season evaluation. You wanted to hear a little bit about the stadium. You wanted to hear about the team. Maybe you wanted to look ahead into the offseason. But John Sherman speaks to the media. He brings up the fact with the downtown stadium that baseball can no longer be played at the K. It's time to leave the K. It's an old ballpark. It has its problems, and they're trying to pick a site by the end of the summer. Play at Kauffman Stadium for 4 or 5 more years. That's what I needed to hear. I know the financials can be a little bit confusing. The financials can be a head scratcher. Who's going to pay for this? And I know John Sherman said it was going to be private funded. You know, it was going to be his group that's trying to put together the money, but maybe need some help in there. Now, I'm not a business expert. I'm not going to do a deep dive in the calculations, the numbers, the stats, the graphs, none of that. What I wanted to hear from John Sherman today is, when is this stadium going to be ready? Said 4 to 5 years. When is this site going to be picked? Said by the end of the summer. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hold him to that. You said this, therefore I'm going to believe this. That's what I'm looking for when John Sherman takes the podium. Now, if you listened to our show yesterday, what did we talk about with the grade card? I said in press conferences, John Sherman gets an A+. He usually knocks those pressers out of the ballpark. He says what you want him to say. But there is a fine line here. There is a difference. And it can't really be mixed up. There are guys that are great at speaking to the public, great at speaking to the media. Think a politician. A politician, when you want to vote for him, they're usually going to feed into the large part of the fan base. You tell them what they want to hear. Politics 101. But how many times will that politician back up those promises? I mean, if you've been around long enough, usually not many times. But with owners, I think it can be a little bit different, and you really can get a good read onto how invested that owner is. I truly believe, and you could disagree with me. I have no problem if you disagree with me, ever. You just let me know in the comments below or tweet at me at JohnnyJ_15. But John Sherman said all the right things once again. I wanted to hear some urgency. He said urgent a lot throughout that presser. I didn't really care too much about if he was accountable or not, because when you are 23-58, there's a lot of blame to go around, but I'm not pointing my finger at anybody. There's really nobody I'm going to put their head on the chopping block. There's no need to. What I did appreciate is him going out and saying these are worse results than we expected, but going into this year, we wanted to evaluate. JJ Piccolo knew this was going to be tough. Matt Quatrero knew this was going to be tough. We're not making excuses for losing, but that was what our goal was. We needed to evaluate this team. We needed to see where our nucleus was. Another great thing he said, at least in my opinion, was that he said they're ready to spend. They need to find that core, though. So that got me thinking. That got the gears going and going, okay, what does he mean by get the nucleus together? Does that mean you just assemble 3 or 4 good guys that perform well offensively and defensively, don't care about the record? Does this group have to win? Is that a big part of it? Does that group have to go out there and have a winning record in the second half? Is this going to be a scenario in which you don't spend until you're ready and we're not going to be ready for 3 or 4 years? That I was curious about. But what I wanted to hear was that urgency. We are ready to spend now. Money doesn't solve everything. If you're going to be a good baseball team, the thing you have to do is draft, develop, trade at the right time, and make the right free agent signings. Now, when you look at the state of the American League Central, it's not a good division. I think a couple of pieces here and there, a good rotation, the Royals could be the Tigers. 5 games out of first place heading into the All-Star break. Every Royals fan out there would accept that. They would accept that next year. If this was where the Royals were at this time next year, 5 games out of first, you'd be more than okay with that. In fact, you'd be going to the game a hell of a lot more. More money in the pockets of this franchise, of this organization. Now, I brought up some free agents that I really do like. I like Martin Perez. I like Jordan Montgomery. Lucas Giolito might be a high asking price, and I think he likes pitching there in Chicago. You want to go maybe cheaper, get a guy on a rebound. Lance Lynn, advanced metrics would tell you he's still got good stuff. But there are pitchers you can add to this rotation and go from there. I understand fans have that scar tissue of, well, why in the hell would we trust an organization that has constantly bombed it with these free agent signings? The Royals haven't had a really solid starting pitcher be signed from another team since who? Edinson Volquez? Didn't work out with Ian Kennedy. Didn't work out with Jason Hamill. Didn't work out with Mike Minor. Didn't work out with Jordan Lyles. Haven't been many, so I understand the scar tissue's there. And it will take somebody actually succeeding for 1 or 2 years for you to earn that trust back. But the misconception I think the fans have, and I talked with a couple people about this on Twitter, is that you don't have to pick one or the other. Of, well, is it tear it all down? You have to draft, develop, don't spend any money until your team is ready to go. Or is it, let's go spend some money and try to win now. Try to piece together a team that can compete in the American League Central. You can do a little bit of both. The beauty of it is you're going to get a first-round pick over and over again. The lottery system has kind of thrown a monkey wrench, if you will, in the plans of tanking. The Royals could lose 112 games and pick third. I've said this before. I'm going to say it again. So there's no value in losing 110 games. There's no guarantee anymore. So the Minnesota Twins, I think it's a perfect example. We're around 500 last year. They're picking higher than the Royals this year. They're picking 5th. So you could build a competitive team, one that can compete all the way up until September by a couple of signings here and there, making sure some of these guys develop, and still go the route of drafting and developing and trading guys at the right time. It makes a lot of sense to do that. And that's what I want John Sherman to do in the offseason of 2024. Hell, it starts right now. It starts in July, the Major League Baseball draft, which we'll have plenty of coverage of coming up next week. But the Major League Baseball draft, vitally important. Trade deadline, vitally important. And John Sherman addressed that as well to the media. When you have that type of power to put your money into this team, you're going to start being criticized on your decisions you either do or don't make. And John Sherman and JJ Picollo are entering an offseason and this upcoming month where a lot is going to be hanging over their heads. This fan base has grown irritable. They're mad about this team. Yes, you celebrate today's win, but they want to know, when is playoff baseball coming back? We're still a ways away from that. But I think the concept of competing, it is doable in this division. And I think right now you want to maybe capitalize when this division is at its weakest. There is not a single team in this division right now that scares me over the next 5 years. And this is coming from your host of Locked On Royals, who is covering this team that is the second worst record in all of baseball. And I'll go out there and say there's not really a team that I truly fear. I thought the White Sox were going to dominate for a decade. They haven't done it. I thought Cleveland was going to dominate for a decade. Haven't done it. Minnesota, they put together some good seasons with free agent signings. They right now are in a crisis mode. So to me, there's nobody that I think is built to have dominant success. Look at the American League East. Look how many dark horse candidates are to win the wild card, how many front runners there are. New York's good. Boston can be good. Toronto is a very dangerous lineup. Baltimore, maybe the best team in that division. That might be a stretch, but want to give some credit to Baltimore. To me, that's a division you don't want to be in. The Central is a division you want to be in. You can compete, and you can work through that farm system again. Add more talent to it. Because also think about this. Maybe you add a couple guys through off-season, 2-year deals. They pitch really well in the first half. You can trade them. Some money might have to be sent their way to the other team you're trading with, but you can get some prospects in return. There is a way to go about this in which you're competitive and rebuild the farm system. You don't need to tear it all down and lose 105 games for 4 straight years. You don't need to do that. You can build a competitor little by little. I'm not saying John Sherman needs to break bank. Don't need to have a $200, $300 million payroll. I understand everybody's reason is, oh, look at the New York Mets. $400 million payroll, highest in baseball, and they're terrible. It's a different thing there. Because they're also playing in a division that has the Braves. They've got the Phillies, the reigning NL champs there. Miami's been great. It's tough to win there. But right now, if you had Detroit's payroll, Detroit has the 19th highest payroll in baseball, 11 games under 500, and they're 5 games out of first place. That is more than doable if you make the right moves. You make the wrong moves, you're back to square one, where you are this year. Your most expensive players, Jordan Lyles, Zach Greinke, eating up some money, and they're not giving you much in return. So John Sherman, he didn't baffle me with anything he said. Some of you in my Twitter post said that he got a D or F in the poll. Well, I was never great at school, but I'm glad I never had any of you as teachers if I was in a public speaking class, because I thought the presser was just fine. I wouldn't give it an A+, but B+ maybe. D or F, there's a lot of anger right now, and I don't think there really needs to be. I get there's some things you want ironed out, but at the end of the day, I didn't really have any issue with what John Sherman came out and said at the press conference this morning at Kauffman Stadium. We're going to take our final break. When we come back here, we do have a guy making his Major League debut tomorrow night against the LA Dodgers. It will be Alec Marsh. We'll talk about him and that start coming up next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned in to Locked On Royals on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15 and check out all of our shows on any podcast outlet you listen to. That can be Spotify. That can be Amazon Music. That can be Apple Podcasts. That can be Odyssey. You also can check out the live stream on YouTube. We've had great responses so far, and I'll always get to your comments. You want to tweet at me anything, you want to comment on YouTube, I'm going to get to it because you are a big part of why I love doing it. I love the listeners. I love covering this team, and not going to stop doing it Monday through Friday. And hopefully here are our next 2 shows might have a special guest we could be teasing. And that special guest is a former Royals player from a very golden era time. But I am going to tease that either tomorrow or I'm going to tease that on Monday. So it will be coming up here in the coming days. Before we say goodbye to you today, though, want to dive into Alec Marsh, who just got promoted to AAA Omaha, had been pitching well in his first 3 to 4 starts, and now is going to be making his Major League debut tomorrow night, Friday night at the K, against the highly touted LA Dodgers lineup. I know they've struggled. I know they're not in first place in the NL West. In fact, third in the NL West. But this is a tall task for a guy in his first start. Now, he played college ball over there near the West Coast at Arizona State. I actually had the chance to interview Alec Marsh 3 years ago. You can check out that story on Royals Review because you can just go to my Twitter page and check out the tweet that I had about that story. He was a fantastic interview, a very analytically inclined guy. Even in that COVID year where the minor league season was canceled, he was somebody that went out there and tried to better himself, tried to work with more data, and now it's put him in this spot, more of an age prospect, but going to get that chance to compete in this rotation. And when you are the Royals in this spot, this is fun. You had Austin Cox making his first major league debut, or not major league debut, his first major league start the other night. Didn't go as well, but you're tuned in for it. On Friday, you're going to get Alec Marsh instead of Jordan Lyles, who's sick, per Matt Quatrero. Then on Saturday, you're going to get Daniel Lynch, who in his last 13 innings has only allowed 1 run. Then on Sunday, you get Brady Singer, who had 6 shutout innings and his last time out. To me, this is going to be the best series of the first half, the most fun one. It's a weekend. I know it's going to be hotter than it's ever been at Kauffman Stadium, it feels like. I think first pitch tomorrow is going to be 98, 99, or 100. Saturday, a little bit cooler. And Sunday, I can't even imagine how hot it's going to be with a 110 first pitch. These are the guys I want to see out on the mound, though. I didn't mind seeing Zach Greinke get the quality start today, but excited to see Alec Marsh get the ball. Excited to see Daniel Lynch and if he can continue that trend. He threw 5 shutout innings last year against the LA Dodgers. And I want to see if Brady Singer can build on it. It's a good test. It's a fun test. You don't need to worry about, are they going to embarrass us? There's not a very good chance the Royals win this series, but it's going to be a series you want to tune into. And we'll dive into all that tomorrow on our show, previewing that game, previewing Alec Marsh's start a little bit. And we're also going to dive into some fun stuff involving this team heading into the All-Star break, some advanced numbers to dive into, some guys that are really thriving of late, some guys that are struggling, and what they need to do about those guys struggling, where they need to position some of these guys in the lineup. And don't forget, as I just teased, we're going to be having a special guest on the show coming up in about the next 1 or 2 shows. Haven't ironed out when this interview is actually going to be happening, but I guarantee you're not going to want to miss it because he really falls into that golden era team. And I'll just give you a little hint. It was 2014 to 2015, a former Royals player. And if you do know the answer, this will be a little bit fun. If you do know the answer, comment on YouTube, tweet at me, and I'll let you know if you are right or not. So that is going to be coming up here in the coming days on the Locked On Royals podcast on the Locked On Network. That will conclude our show today, though. The Royals get it done this afternoon. Walk-off fashion against the Cleveland Guardians, with the hero being Freddy Fermin, who's just been on a tear over the last week. In fact, over the last 2 weeks, he's been a really damn good player at the plate and behind the plate defensively as well. But it was fun to watch that today. A 2-run double into the left field corner off Emmanuel Clase. Royals win 4-3 to move to 23-58 on the season. We're at the halfway point of the regular season. Will the Royals have a winning record in the second half? Is it going to be more of the same? Where will this team end up? What's the record going to be? I'm sure we'll have some shows dedicated to that over the All-Star break. John Sherman had his presser, dove into some of those comments, and Alec Marsh, the number 14 prospect in the Royal system, making his debut tomorrow night against the LA Dodgers. Very pumped for that one. But thank you so much for tuning in, for listening, and if you stuck with us for this entire week, it's been a blast. Can't wait to continue our coverage of the Kansas City Royals right here on the Locked On Network. But tomorrow, going to have some fun stuff with Alec Marsh, a deep dive into some of the struggling and improving players, and maybe even some more trade deadline talk as we inch closer to the month of July. Until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.